What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizard's website. And we are still here with Dominaria, and we are back this week with Return to Dominaria-Episode 5, as always, by Martha Wells. My quick review in the beginning, I really liked this one. This is my personal preference, but I appreciate character-driven stories. I appreciate seeing characters interacting with one another, old characters, new characters, commingling, and us getting to see their personalities a lot more. This was a story that I will admit, to a degree, was catered towards my interests, and so I really enjoyed it. I think it's definitely worth your time if you want to learn more about old characters and see new characterizations. Learn more about old characters and new characters and see new characterizations for each. What about you? What were your thoughts?
Meh. And the reason is the same reason that you enjoyed it. I also enjoy character-driven stories, but I didn't like the characterization. I didn't feel it was good.
Okay. Well, we can unpack that a little bit, but be aware that that then is a point of contention. If you have not read this story yet, we encourage you to do so as long as that concept of a story doesn't completely disgust you and you think it would be a waste of your time. Go read it and see if you agree with me, Amy, or neither. If you have your own completely tertiary opinion, which is great. And as always, come on back after you've read the story and come share it with us in the comments and you know, listen to our opinions as well and refute them or agree with them as you would like. But onto the full review itself. This story I felt like had a lot. There was a lot going on. I appreciated that, especially after our opinions last week, which were somewhat lackluster in that it was very samey and that we felt like not a lot got accomplished by the end of it. In this one, I felt like there was a lot more that got accomplished. I feel like we learned a lot more, like I said, about the characters, but also there was movement, right? There was travel from one place to another, whereas last week's story, besides the flashback, was kind of focused all in one area, and there was no real movement there. So I appreciated that. I don't know if you felt differently.
Meh.
Wow. Okay. This story started as, I guess, 2 weeks ago's story ended, or last week's story, but with the discussion with Ajani, which if you've watched the show for a while, you know quite well that I was happy about. Ajani is my favorite planeswalker, but I thought it was interesting that they had Ajani kind of do the same thing that they did with, or they did the same thing with Ajani that they did with Nissa and Chandra a couple of weeks ago, which was just, he's here, he makes some comments, and then he bails. Now, you know to a degree where he went, but he's gone now. There was a way to write him out because you knew he was going to be on Dominaria, but we knew from whether it be the spoilers or the actual leaks or whatever, there weren't any cards that bore his name or now that a lot of cards have been spoiled, none that I have seen or can recall show his image in any way. And so that's a way for you to look at it and say, is he even on this plane? You know, is he in this set? Is he? And this is the way to have him in the story because the story calls for him to be there, but have him be written off enough that he's going to go off and do his own thing. Will he be back? Who knows? It depends on what planeswalkers he's going to find. As he said, he was going to go recruit more for the cause of fighting Nicol Bolas. And we'll see what happens with that, but
I mean, frankly, you could have been doing that this whole time.
Well, I think, don't forget, I think he may have assumed that he had the Gatewatch on his side.
I mean, he did, but
So he might not have thought that he needed a ton more, and now he's like, great, thanks guys, you're jerks, now I gotta go do that much more work than I thought, let me go do that. You know, because he might have thought that he was going to have the help of the Gatewatch in seeking out these new planeswalkers, and now learning that they completely, I don't want to say disobeyed because that implies that he ordered them, but that they didn't take his advice despite the fact that they said they would take his advice, And so maybe he needs a little bit of time to trust them again, because he doesn't right now, and I don't blame him. But
I mean, I don't blame him either. But he also came into this story already knowing that they had fought Nicol Bolas and failed.
he didn't know that. Why would he have known that?
He said that
To whom?
to Gideon.
No, but that was
Liliana.
right. But that was implying that Gideon explained that they said Gideon went into a long and embarrassing
Oh, yeah.
explanation, and so Gideon then explained what happened, and that's when Ajani got pissed off, because otherwise Ajani had no idea,
Okay.
because this was the first time he was seeing them, and asked where are the others, and it's like, well, we don't know where Jace is, and Nissa and Chandra Nissa got pissed off, and Chandra realized she needed to get stronger because, by the way, we fought Nicol Bolas and lost. P.S. Just throw that one in there.
By the way, that thing that you said not to do, you see,
we blatantly
we
did
it. And
almost immediately after you told us not to, that's immediately what we did. But we got a little bit of information on how Ajani and Joyra met, that when we kind of saw Ajani, or saw Joyra introducing Ajani, that was really the second time that they had ever spoken. And the first time was when Ajani met her and was like, hey, I'm going to need your help. There are these other planeswalkers coming, and you can help me out, and it'll be great. But he... that's Ajani was used as the vessel, if you will, to describe to Joyra about Karn still being alive, which she was not aware of, but it being at the cost of Venser's spark/life, which she also was not aware of. And I think that's so interesting. Again, my own personal bias, but of course the first thing I thought of was my personal favorite Magic story, Release, with Ajani kind of coming to terms with the loss of his friend, Elspeth. And it's so interesting because Joyra was so private with her grief of that. Like, she turned around, she didn't want him to see. If she had only known, right? If she only knew.
I thought of that story too.
What she could have gained from having mentioned it to him.
Yeah.
Because Ajani just recently came to terms with the loss of a close friend.
Well, I mean, the thing is, he knows. It's just that, and they made a point of saying that he knows.
Right.
It's just that he's also respectful enough to not pry.
Correct.
Correct.
And Joyra, while dealing with all that Weatherlight business, that may not have been the time to say, okay, come on, tell me about your feelings. She had other things that she was focusing on, but...
Let's sit and cry for 2 hours.
But I thought it was interesting that, that it was Johnny who gave that news when he is the main character that we've seen so far kind of coming to grips with loss in somewhat of a healthy manner, right? Being able to sit and process it and cry and show emotion, as opposed to...
Well, we know that Liliana's not getting to do that. So.
Correct. I mean, there's Gideon, right, who has all he has the flashes of his irregulars dying because of him so often at this point.
And it affects so many of his decisions in really not always the best way.
Right. So we that's why I'm saying I think Johnny's really the only adult in this situation.
Yeah.
Who's like...
Well, I mean, we knew that before this story started because he's the one who said, now see, fighting Nicol Bolas is a bad idea.
Well, not only...
And they were all like, yes, Dad. And then as soon as he left the room...
Well, and obviously he did it out of experience, and they were all like, whatever, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But that's hilarious. So that dichotomy is interesting. And Ajani left, I mean, through Liliana's perspective, we learned that Ajani is kind of frustratingly calm throughout this whole experience. And yet it still is like that idea of, he still bails. He's still like, all right, you guys messed up. I'm going to go do what I got to do. You two do whatever the hell you want with this Bells and Lock character and whatever.
Sorry, I'm having issues.
Jesus. And thankfully, Gideon and Liliana meet Joyra and the new Weatherlight crew because they're all like, yeah, we're all about fighting the Cabal. Let's do it. You know, Bells and Lock, killing him sounds like a great idea. And so, despite the fact that Ajani's like, I'm not helping you kill this Bells and Lock guy. We've got Nicol Bolas to deal with, right? Now we have another group that Gideon and Liliana have found that will help them along their path anyway, despite the fact that Ajani's like, yeah, no, you didn't listen to me the first time, and now you're going to come to me and be like, but really we need your help though. So, and I don't blame him.
Well, like, I mean, the whole fact that the rest of them were just so like, oh yeah, sure, good plan. Let's kill Bells and Lock then, why not? Seemed really stupid. And also, I didn't love that, I forgot now.
Well, if you think of it, let us know. But I also wanted to point out, kind of still going along with this discussion, I thought it was super interesting that Liliana and Gideon are now headed to Benalia City, right? When we first see them, they're headed to Benalia City, and they're going to the spot where Johnny said he was going to meet up with them, which was at the top of a very tall tower. And that's where we get kind of the first, there were a couple of good comedy moments in this story, I thought. And the first one was Liliana calling Ajani pretentious. I'll say that again. Liliana called someone, anyone, it doesn't matter who, she called someone pretentious and was saying that in a bad way. I thought that was hilarious. That's, again, talking about characterization, that fact that she's completely unaware or unironically being that hypocritical, because that's what Liliana does, was super funny to me. I really appreciated that she was saying that the reason for Ajani asking them to meet up at the top of a super tall tower was probably a pretentious reason. And then we see the owl come in and the Weatherlight come in, and so then we get to see that's how they get on the Weatherlight in the first place, is Ajani going to meet them.
So you found that funny. I found it odd.
Okay, why so?
Because I thought of it as being one of two things. One, an odd character choice, or two, bad characterization. It's not what you would think Liliana would think. So it's either a complete shift in her character, as we're saying again this week, or it's just that Martha Wells, specifically, is not aware enough of these characters to characterize them in an appropriate manner.
That's interesting. I kind of took it in a different direction. I thought of it as just Liliana being annoyed by Ajani's pretension, not realizing that it could be argued that she does something quite similar. And so that was kind of where my head went with it and listening to it. Who knows? Let us know what you think, as always. So I also thought, still talking about this discussion between Gideon, Liliana, and Ajani, I mean, Liliana clearly is getting more and more pissed off. Gideon, interestingly, steps in and defends Liliana to Ajani and says, look, Ajani, it's not her fault. You know, put it on me. I allowed this to happen. I okayed it. Which, again, kind of implies that Gideon is taking up the...
Kind of surprising, but kind of not.
Well, but it's Gideon taking up the leadership role of the Gatewatch, which some other people might have some things to say about that, but for now, right, Liliana wasn't going to say anything about it because she was trying to keep her cool and not attack Ajani just because he was being so annoyingly calm about this whole thing. But, you know, also taking the blame off of her because she is... You know, Ajani's kind of pointing the finger at her and saying, well, it's your fault. And Gideon's like, no. It was me too. You know, put it on me. Don't worry about it. So
Yeah, but that almost seemed more along the lines of Gideon becoming a lot closer with Liliana, which makes sense after what happened in the other story.
Which is the next point I was going to bring up. Thank you for the no, that's perfect. Thank you for the great segue, because also in that discussion, Liliana points out, at least internally, she realizes that Gideon chose not to mention the Jozu encounter, chose not to mention the killing of Jozu, or the routing of him. He was already dead, but whatever, you know what I mean. And chose to not bring it up at all. And Liliana was super happy about that, or at least relieved, because she's like, I don't want these people's pity, right? I don't need these people, Johnny specifically, but really everybody else who was around, to feel bad for her and to start trying to, again, counsel her. It's okay, talk about it if you want to, whatever. She doesn't want that.
And
right.
all of that.
She doesn't want that. And we know she doesn't want that. And so, but kind of internally.
That was correct characterization.
and internally is able to, she realizes that Gideon purposefully doesn't call her out in front of everyone else, which she, without maybe necessarily realizing it, she's grateful for that.
And surprised for that.
Yes.
I feel like she was more surprised than the audience was.
Okay, yep.
Of that.
Yep. Well, I mean, again, and we'll get to it, but I have been saying that, Gideon and Liliana was going to be a thing for a while. Just because, they don't go that hard off over and over again on having Liliana calling Gideon all these names and Gideon kind of letting it roll off his back, but she's also constantly referencing his musculature and, how he always has his shirt off, or, finds a way to take his shirt off or something like that. So that's another thing, and we'll get to that in a minute. But so Johnny is there, he stays calm, and then he leaves. And again, another comedic moment of Raph being there, right? And it's just a way to remind us that other people are there at this moment with these three planeswalkers talking to each other, and then they're being surrounded by people who, the story even tells us, some of these people might not be fully familiar with planeswalking, and JaAR is obviously familiar with planeswalking, and
right.
I say obviously because very close friends with Teferi, with Karn, with Venser, like we know these people, we know JaAR knows these people, and has planeswalked with Teferi many times pre-mending, so she is aware of their abilities, and she's thousands of years old or whatever. But people like Raph, they're aware of magic and stuff like that, but they might not know or have seen a planeswalker before, and you have to worry about that with Tiana, Arvad, Shauna, like all these people that, these characters, Johnny really mainly, right? He planeswalked in, he planeswalked out, and again, JaAR / the story makes a point of mentioning that it's, thankfully, the people who would have been shocked by that or confused by that weren't really around, which was a good thing because Johnny really didn't seem to care. He just kind of walked away because he needed to be somewhere and was seemingly at least somewhat annoyed.
That was another part of the story that felt very dumb. It felt like, we're throwing this sentence in here because it'll make things convenient. It's like, okay, but no. This is bad.
The reason I brought it up though was because when he did planeswalk away, I liked Raph's comment, right? And again, I thought it was really just there to remind us that Raph existed at that time in that place, but also was comedic. I enjoyed it where Raph was like, okay, thanks for coming, bye, please feel free to have random planeswalker conversations that none of us can understand next time. I thought it was kind of funny.
Another moment that I didn't feel was comedic.
Well, there you go.
You thought it was funny, and
I did.
I thought it was just Raph not understanding that Johnny could no longer hear him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought, well, he might have just been making the joke for other people who were around. The kind of thing where, like, you're trying to be the funny guy, and so you try to, like, even if a Johnny can't hear it, it's not for a Johnny, it's for everybody else.
Right.
You know? Who knows?
Or it's for your way of saying, like, oh, thanks so much for actually saying goodbye before you left.
right. And kind of pointing out to everybody else, rude, you know, like, you know, it's pointing at somebody else. But then we get to the discussion among the new Weatherlight crew and Gideon and Liliana talking about Belzenlock and the next step and fighting the Cabal and etc. And Liliana, I think interestingly, is a little uncertain. She's like, why do you want to do this?
Yeah.
Why are you all so gung-ho about fighting and killing this demon? Like, look at yourselves. We don't know, because at that point she didn't know who the hell any of these people were, right? She was surprised by JaAR commenting on being aware, like having done something pre-Phyrexian War, and Liliana's like, what the hell? And JaAR's like, yeah, I'm older than I look. So there's that moment of Liliana being aware of the history of the plane and being aware of the fact that this young-looking woman would totally not have been around at that time, and then somewhat gaining an understanding of, okay, so this girl is more than what she seems.
Right.
And so at least understanding that.
And I think that's good to help her kind of gain a little bit more perspective, because I feel like she showed up on Dominaria and I don't know, she had kind of been knocked off her pedestal a little bit.
Oh yeah.
And but then she was back in Dominaria and she was all, you know, kind of reverting back to her young self, as traumatic things had happened to her in that period of time.
Yep.
And that place. So this is yet another thing that kind of helps her see how unpowerful she is. Like, okay, you're not the only one who can do shit. You know, you know, there are lots of other people around who are also planeswalkers and also skilled and also this and also that, and they can give you a run for your money. And so let's stop underestimating people like, you know, Nicol Bolas or Belzenlock or whoever, you know, and, you know.
Right, and I mean,
it's just like another peg to knock her down in this story. And I feel like it's, or on this plane, I should say.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a little, it seems a little bit forced.
I don't know. I mean, I like it. I think because she had the moment where even injured Gideon, she needed him to help her in the city. Right, and now she's meeting these new people. We see in the fight with the Cabal agent later that she gets hit with more dementia magic, which she says didn't affect her after the fact, but she needed help from Joda and Gideon and Shauna, like all four of them really were the ones. I mean, JaAR, right, was able to dissipate the spell at first to save Joda, but then Shauna, Gideon, Liliana, and Joda working together were then able to kind of incapacitate, is the word I was looking for. I almost didn't have it. We're able to incapacitate this agent to stop them from attacking any further. And Liliana, who seemingly thought, I mean, she was faster than Gideon, right? Her purple bolt of magic flew faster than Gideon could charge over there, but it wasn't enough. It was something, but the agent was able to get off a blast of magic that kind of caught Liliana by surprise, and she gasped a little, and Gideon knew what happened, right? He said, you saw Jozu, didn't you? And she's like, yeah, but it didn't really affect me. I've just been seeing Jozu constantly recently. So she was still somewhat vulnerable, and we saw that. And while in this story it wasn't really acknowledged by her that Joda and Jorah and Shauna and Raph and whoever did a good job, she didn't acknowledge that, but she's going to start realizing that real fast, because these people are not schlubs. They know
Right.
what they're doing and they're powerful enough.
And they're helping her out a lot because she's obviously not at her best right now.
And don't forget, it was mentioned in this story and it was mentioned in the last one that it was relevant, that the chain veil specifically is what weakened her. She knew that going in. She knew that using the chain veil to get rid of Jozu, I almost said Joda, Jozu, would be draining on her and would leave her vulnerable in a way that she would then have to figure out a different tactic to get rid of Belzenlach. And now that she's seeing how these people fight, it's better.
Yeah.
Now, talking about the fight with the Cabal agent, that's when they went to Talaria West. And they get there, and on the way there, we're going to have this discussion now. As they get closer, JaAR notices someone down below and says, oh crap, you know, either Liliana or Gideon notices that she's getting a little tense, and she says, oh, it was Liliana, and she says, it's just an ex-lover. And Liliana says, oh, ex-lovers can absolutely be a problem, trust me. And finally, because for you loyal JaAR viewers out there, it took over 100 episodes for Amy to be fully canonically vindicated here.
Yes.
But so I'm going to call it out when I see it. But Gideon, and again, another comedic moment where Gideon is the one, you know, Liliana mentions, oh, ex-lovers can be a pain. And, you know, especially when they run off and you don't know where they went and they don't tell you their plans. And Gideon goes, oh, come on, Liliana, Jace would never. And Liliana cuts him off. But now we have definitive. I mean, obviously, what's your line? Go ahead.
They're exes.
And Amy has been saying that since Shadows over Innistrad, like the second or third story from Shadows over Innistrad, which is like the second or third episode of JaAR. So look at the episode numbers down below. That's how many it's been. But not that I've denied it necessarily, but it has not been canon, right? It's been hinted at and somewhat obvious that, you know, they were likely intimate, whether it was prior to that meeting in Innistrad or just while they were on Ravnica, and they kind of hinted on, you know, once Liliana had joined the Gatewatch, they hinted at the fact that the two of them were meeting up for sojourns, if you will, because I'm going to totally use that word and make it make sense. But
What?
like running off together and whatever. That whether she's solely referring to Ravnica after Liliana joined the Gatewatch, or whether they're referring to even prior to that, it has finally officially been mentioned now, canonically, that they are in fact exes. And so Amy has been right. Let the record show. Amy has said
anyway.
She said it for a very long time. That's all I'm saying. Props. So I thought that was interesting in the fact that Gideon even later mentions that Joda, oh my god, no, I was right, Joda and JaAR. Between Joda, JaAR, and Jozu, I'm going to get real messed up this block. God bless you. God bless you. But I'm trying very hard to get those names right. But anyway, Joda and JaAR worked together quite well when they had a problem to solve. And Gideon even says, I wish Liliana and Jace could work like that with one another. So that's really interesting that not only was that comparison made just as a way for Gideon and Liliana to have a quick discussion about Liliana and Jace, but it was then later used to say, no, these two make it work when they are entrenched in getting a job done, which Gideon has seen many times in Gatewatch-related business, that they still bicker like crazy despite the fact that they have stuff that they need to do, and they don't sometimes.
Yeah, but that's another way of possible foreshadowing because, you know, we now know that Jace, having gone through all that stuff with Veraska, is in a much different headspace now than he was back then.
Especially as it relates to or specifically as it relates to Liliana.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
So it might be a way for us to kind of remember back that possibly when the two meet again, it's not going to be the same as it was before.
Oh, I'm super looking forward to it.
Right, me too. Especially since Liliana is much more vulnerable with Gideon now. And that's another thing that was trying to show, is Gideon's aware of you. You know, you keep fronting, but Gideon's aware of what's happening, you know. And he's not going around telling everybody, you know, he cares about you and your feelings.
Yeah, and he's actually supporting you in it as well.
Right.
As opposed to just not talking about it at all. He's actually
Right.
asking you about it in private.
Right. So, you know, if you're in a situation where you're literally saying, you better not tell anyone this, like, he's not going to do it.
Right.
And if he doesn't feel like you would want people to know, he's not going to do it. Like the Jozu thing. And, you know, he is aware of the fact that Jace is your ex, and is aware of the fact that, you know, your grieving process hasn't really started yet, or, I mean, debatably, she's been going through her grieving process her whole life, pretty much, practically at this point.
Right.
With her brother, but...
And or tamping it down until it then came all the way back up.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So he knows that the shit's eventually going to hit the fan.
Right.
And he's trying to let you know that he's going to support you when that happens, instead of just running for the hills.
Well, and not only that, but in the background, he is presumably thinking about how it will affect any missions that they might be on at the time when this starts to affect her.
Right.
Because he needs to know the people that he has, know who he can count on, what their skills are, and what their weaknesses are. And if that's going to be a problem that's going to come up for Liliana, especially when she sees Belzenlock, who she now knows used her brother's dead lich corpse against her, right? That may be a thing that she's not necessarily going to be able to just be like, oh, right, my demon, kill, right? She might have to deal with the fact that he may pull a, oh my god, I'm not going to remember his name, Baral. He might pull a Baral and just start spouting off and getting into her head and trying to make her make mistakes. So that'll be very interesting when they see that and when we see that. And I actually, talking about Gideon and Liliana together, I had a question for you based on something that you were talking about before, with where you felt that there was mischaracterization of Liliana.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the end of this story, following the discussions of trust between Liliana and Gideon, the discussions of caring between those two, at the end or towards the end of the story, as they're going back to the Weatherlight and they see Tiana says, oh, Arvad is making dinner. And Liliana kind of leans over to Gideon. I could almost see it, right? Liliana leans over to Gideon and goes, the vampire is making dinner. And Gideon laughs about it. That is, as far as I know, literally the first time that Liliana has ever made a joke that I'm aware of that is not at one of the other Gatewatch's expense, I guess. And now Gideon is actually laughing about it.
Yeah.
So, sure.
That's the first time we've seen Gideon actually amused by something that she said.
Correct. And so, I mean, Liliana makes jokes at other people's expenses all the time.
Yeah.
Because...
But that was also the only point in this story that I felt was actually comedic.
Okay, but so that's fair. But so let me ask, do you feel that that was a correct characterization and an expansion of her character, or a mischaracterization because she's not normally like that?
I think she is normally like that. I think perhaps Gideon isn't normally like that.
Okay.
But that I actually saw as a correct characterization.
Okay.
Not as an incorrect one.
Okay.
Because maybe it's just easier to tell the ways in which Gideon's character is changing.
Because he wears his heart on his sleeve all the time, you mean? Or no? Go on, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And maybe it's just hard to see kind of where they're going with Liliana's characterization.
Okay.
So it's hard to see if we're on the track that we need to be on with it.
Mm-hmm.
But Gideon's is much more straightforward because it's Gideon, and that's Gideon. So even when his character is developing and changing and evolving, he's still pretty straightforward because he's him.
Right.
Liliana's not like that, and she never was. So it's going to be a lot more difficult to follow the meandering stream that is Liliana's psyche and emotional experiences and things like that. So I think that maybe it's just easier to follow Gideon's, but it's still too early to tell, which I think sucks because we're still sitting here. How many stories has it been?
This is
5.
Yeah.
And I'm still sitting here going, I can't tell if I like Liliana's characterization or not. And
Well, and make no mistake, right? I may have missed it, but I don't believe I did. There have been 3 story spotlight cards out of 4 spoiled at the time of this recording. 3 out of 4. And let me tell you, all 3 of them reference Liliana. So make no mistake, this story is about our necromantic black planeswalker friend, right? That is what we're dealing with in the Dominaria stories. Obviously, we're going to have Teferi, as was hinted at the end of this story. We have Karn, which was discussed in this story. We have Joda, we have JaAR, we have the Weatherlight, we have all these different characters. But make no mistake, top to bottom, they have made it very clear that this is a Liliana story.
yeah.
And all of you Gatewatch haters out there, sorry, but I'm not sorry. I'm looking forward to it and I've been enjoying it. You know, there was a hiccup last week, but regardless, that's just because I dislike a story doesn't mean that the set of stories is bad, and it doesn't mean that that story was bad. It just means that I didn't enjoy it, and we will see how it sets up other stories in the future. But
Yeah, and that's what I'm really saying with this is I'm hoping that the characterization snowball starts to really roll so that I can see the direction that it's in.
Yes.
Because right now it kind of feels like it's just slowly moving back and forth and coming back around, and you really can't tell what's happening with it yet. And so it's hard for me to sit here and say, gee, I really hate this characterization, it's all wrong, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to say that, but it's kind of hard not to, while it also kind of is hard to do that, because it's only story 5, but it's already story 5.
I was going to say, as of next week, we're halfway through.
So
be aware of that.
It's a little worrisome.
I wouldn't quite say that I'm worried. I don't think you're wrong by any means. I wouldn't personally say I'm worried. I'm anticipatory. Like I'm still looking forward to it. I'm confident. Right. I'm confident that it'll happen. I didn't, unlike last week, I didn't dislike this as some sort of a setup story, although I think that there was a little bit more action and it allowed the plot to be furthered. We still haven't seen Karn yet, which is interesting because we're about halfway through, and we're about to see Teferi seemingly next week, based on how this story ended, that JaAR was like, I know a time guy.
Right.
So we'll see how that works out next week. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was through the
I have a couple more things.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please go right ahead.
You can
Okay.
say your thing and we can come to it after.
Sure, I was just going to
don't
talk.
want you to cut me off.
No, that's fine. I was just going to talk about this. So I don't know if you want to say anything before that.
Yeah, why don't I go?
Yeah, please go right ahead. Absolutely.
So I really like what you said about Gideon before,
Okay.
when you were talking about leadership.
Yes.
And it made me think back to Amonkhet, where he basically learned all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that we're actually going to get to see those things play out. Like you said, being able to identify who in the group is going to be good at what, and putting them in the right place at the right time and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
He learned that in Amonkhet.
In the trials and stuff that he was doing.
And
yeah.
so, you know, I'm hoping that there's going to be a nice big picture kind of a moment with that. Because I think we've kind of learned also from Ixalan that Jace has learned to let go of those reins a little bit. Captain Veraska, Captain Veraska, Captain.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I think we're going to see that Gideon becomes the leader of the Gatewatch and Jace just falls in. And Gideon is able to do a better job of being a leader because he's already in that state of mind where he is more more perceptive, you know, and we're only seeing it with Liliana right now.
Right.
Well, I mean, you could arguably say with Jace because he sat there and said, well, Jace wouldn't, you know.
Right. But he doesn't know new Jace yet.
Right, exactly.
Or new and improved Jace.
But the point is that I think we're seeing them fall into roles a little bit more than we did before. And I'm hoping that we're going to get to see that develop a lot more so that those roles can actually like come to fruition.
Well, and don't forget what I've been saying, which is that you don't just go from, we fought Nicol Bolas, we lost soundly, let's just meet back up and fight him again.
Right.
Clearly that's not what happens. What happens is we fought Nicol Bolas, we lost soundly, and now from a story perspective, the story needs to show each of them improving in some meaningful way so that the next time they see Bolas, it's different. It needs to be different because otherwise, how is the outcome to be any different? And sure, you could argue that they should just bring a bunch more people, which is what Ajani is working on, but we again have already seen Jace is better. He is better than he was when he last saw Bolas. He has created a sleeper agent, if you will, in Veraska, but he himself has improved because he's regained all of his lost memories from training with Alhammareth.
And he's gained law magic,
Correct.
presumably.
Seemingly, yes. Or at least perfected its usage. And now we're seeing Gideon. And just like you were saying, hopefully he will be continuing to improve both tactically and physically, and that's what I'll talk about in the end. That's my last point, but I wanted to, like you said, I do not want to cut you off, so.
Yeah, I mean, the statement that Liliana made at Gideon, where she was just like, I will not shut up, and blah, 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 and I'm like, is this supposed to be a thing, or is it just, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know about it.
You talking about when she was with Ajani, you mean? When did she, I'm trying to remember the moment that occurred.
I don't know.
Okay. That's fine. I'll look back at the story as well, because
I wasn't sure if that was, again, bad characterization, or if it was trying to show something and just missing the mark.
Okay.
but I didn't feel that it was actually showing anything.
Okay. All right. Interesting point. There's a lot of things that we've both individually and collectively brought up today that obviously we would love your opinions on, as always. So please leave them in the comments. Let us know what you think. Did you have anything else before this last
I don't think so.
point? You sure?
Yeah.
All right. So the last thing I wanted to bring up is somewhat related to card spoilers. So if you are purposefully avoiding card spoilers, then feel free to skip this part. I'm not going to go into the card very extensively, more the flavor text. So if that's still something you're not interested in hearing, skip. But at the end of this story, we find out that one of the pieces of information that the group was able to gather through their interrogation of this Cabal agent was information about the Black Blade, which we know as the sword of Dakan Blackblade, who there's been a lot of discussion of him recently. Personal note, we just this past weekend met Richard Kane Ferguson, the artist of Dakan Blackblade, which was such a cool experience. So check out our Twitter. We had a picture up of the three of us hanging out. It was really cool.
I think he pronounced it Dakan.
Okay, so there you go. There you go.
I can't remember, but I think so.
If you care, super down-to-earth dude.
Yes,
Loved talking
cool.
with him. Amy got to geek out about art, which was fantastic. I loved watching that.
And
But anyway,
I got a hug.
yes. But anyway, so to go back to the actual review itself, we can gush more on Twitter. We would love to tell you more stories, so feel free to message us on Twitter and ask away.
I will gush as long as you like.
Yes. So, but anyway, so we find out about the Black Blade, and Gideon's like, what is this? And we find out information about it, that it's an ancient Black Blade, and it killed an Elder Dragon. These things we knew, right?
I don't know if we said this a second ago. He's the artist of the original.
I think I said that.
But not the new version.
Correct. Of just the sword.
I just wanted to specify
he did not. Yes.
that the new art was not done by Richard.
Correct.
Kane.
And that was in this story, and it always credits the artist at the bottom, so definitely, I mean, I love that art too, so props to that artist as well, whose name I apologize, I don't know offhand.
Yeah.
But it's in the story, so please go check it out and give them the proper credit.
Or leave it in the comments.
I mean, sure. Like I said,
Why not?
Sure. Anyway, so yes, they find out about the Black Blade, and they find out that it killed an Elder Dragon, it can absorb the souls of those that it defeats, and if it currently contains the soul of an Elder Dragon, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really, really awesome. And it's an ancient sword, so I'm sure it didn't only kill an Elder Dragon. I'm sure there are other, what would at that point arguably be like menial souls, but still souls.
Well. Rude.
I mean, maybe. But I thought that was really cool.
Just
So
because they're not an Elder Dragon, they're not good enough for you?
pretty much.
That's fine.
I don't think I'm being that picky. But yeah, but Gideon, Liliana says, oh, that might be useful for us. And Gideon's like, we are not using an evil, dark, soul-stealing sword.
Yeah. And that's kind of where it snaps back a little bit. Because we've been in sort of this little, like, bubble of, aw, they love each other. And then it's like, Gideon's like, we're not using it. And it sounds like just the sort of weapon you love to use, you know?
And yet, here's where the spoiler comes in. The flavor text of that card does officially reference Gideon using the sword. Or at least it says something to the effect of, like, you know, let's see how it does in Gideon's hands. So it looks like that's where that's going to happen. And I need to shout out Amy here, because I had not put two and two together in this case, but Amy pointed out that as Gideon appeared on Dominaria, he referenced the fact that he didn't have his Searle anymore. So looks like the guy's without a main weapon, right? He's got a sword, but it ain't no Black Blade. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. That I'm super looking forward to. Whether that comes into play against Bells and Locke, or whether they kill Bells and Locke and then get the sword, because it seems like the sword and Bells and Locke are in the fortress or the stronghold. And so They have to get into the stronghold, which it looks like they're going to go to Teferi for help first. We will see what happens next week when we will be, as we said, halfway through this story.
Yes.
Or these set of stories. So thank you guys so much once again for watching another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I loved this one. I loved this episode. I thought it went really well. Hopefully you guys did too. And let us know your opinions of the things that we discussed and the episode itself in the comments down below. All of that, combined with all of what we just did, would be you joining us in showing off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
As always, I'm loving it. Like I said, this has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.